Now, this is how you do a parade, right? Everybody loves a parade. The Romans practically invented them. They called it a triumphal procession, which is really just a festive way of saying, well, a parade. These were reserved for times of great celebration. Maybe you've just conquered and sacked another province in Outer Gaul. Maybe Julius Caesar has just crossed the Rubicon and become the emperor. The triumphal procession is kind of the ultimate PR statement. You line up your impressive army, you march your captives out front, perhaps with their leader in chains. Your emperor is the focal point. He rides in a 4-horse chariot, wears a crown of laurel, and an embroidered triumphal toga. He carries something that identifies him as a king, or perhaps a god, and on some occasions, he even paints his face red. I'll never forget going downtown in 1995 for the parade down Peachtree Street when the Atlanta Braves won the World Series. It was insane. This was the city's chance to finally say, we are the best. We have conquered Cleveland, and thus all of Major League Baseball. A parade is a chance to strut your stuff. Well, the Roman triumphal procession did that. It was all about power, about strength and force, and even a veiled threat. From parades to crosses along the roadway, the Romans were very good at getting across the idea that it's best not to challenge your overlords. This is how they built what was then the greatest and most enduring empire in world history. Now, here's another triumphal procession. Let's compare and contrast. This, of course, is the triumphant entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, which marks the beginning of Passion Week. Scholars agree that this parade, such as it is, bears all the marks of an ancient triumphal march. It focuses on a king riding into his capital city. It's intended to make a statement, and it's attended by people shouting praises along the way. Those are the similarities. But we can all agree there are some important differences. Jesus rides into a city with every expectation of being greeted by hostility and even death. He rides not in a chariot with 4 fine horses, but on a donkey. He brings no captives, no heads on pikes, no defeated foes. Actually, he comes to set people free. And let's look 5 days ahead to the true end of this procession. Jesus does, in fact, wear a makeshift crown, if not one of laurels. He has a festive robe thrust upon his shoulders, just as Caesar might wear. He'll be lifted high, though not on a throne. And lastly, remember the great leader is supposed to be marked with something that identifies him as a king or a god? The Romans added that sign that said King of the Jews in mocking fashion. Oh, and if an emperor would paint his face red, well, they did that for Jesus in a way. Every one of these elements is a cruel, ugly caricature of Roman triumph. So no one will miss the message. The Romans are the ultimate in power. Jesus, on the other hand, is the very embodiment of humility. Those among the Jews who were looking for a Messiah understood what they were seeing. 500 years earlier, the prophet Zechariah had written, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." It was one of those well-known ideas, and Matthew's quick to point it out in his gospel. But as they often did, the people heard the part about a king and the part about triumphant and victorious, loud and clear, but they missed the symbolism of the donkey. Now, donkeys are useful animals. They were the go-to vehicles of their time, but they were not creatures of war. No king would ride a donkey to show off. Isaiah had said quite famously that the deliverer would be despised and rejected, a man of suffering, acquainted with grief. But still, the people managed to look for a soldier king, someone who was a match for Roman toughness. But Jesus, as we'll see, made careful plans to ride on this donkey. He was very clear about the signals he wanted to send. Yes, he was the chosen one, But no, he wasn't on any ego trip. He traveled a road fit for a man despised and rejected, acquainted with grief. Let's begin reading Mark 11 at verse 1. When they were approaching Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany, near the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' just say this, 'The Lord needs it, and will send it back here immediately.'" They went away and found a colt tied near a door, outside in the street. As they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" They told them what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut in the fields. Then those who went ahead and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven." Jesus passed through the villages of Bethphage and Bethany along the foot of the Mount of Olives and headed for the east gate of the city, because it was the nearest one to the temple, which was his destination. As he drew closer, he gave directions to those two unnamed disciples about where to find the young donkey. The disciples do that, and they're allowed to take the beast. Now, this is often looked upon as a miracle of some kind, and it may be, but we also know this was Passover week, and certain rules applied. The Hebrew law placed a high premium on hospitality to strangers. The New Testament does too, for that matter. And believe it or not, city dwellers expected a knock on the door, and people who came for the feast were welcomed, even if they were strangers. If you needed a room, or perhaps to borrow a donkey for a couple of hours, people should oblige. When the disciples say, "The Lord needs it," remember, Lord means master, our master. And we'll return the donkey pretty quickly. Jesus also had lots of friends in this area. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus lived in Bethany, for example. Jesus was well known in the area, so it wasn't difficult at all to secure a donkey. Jesus may have simply made these arrangements earlier. So now, this Zechariah scenario is set up, and the people readily responded by laying down their cloaks, a symbol of political allegiance. We're in your corner. And also, palms and branches. Branches were symbols of Jewish nationalism and victory. The way we might wave a flag at a 4th of July parade, the people offered palms and branches, which were all around. They also shouted, maybe chanted, the way crowds might do at a rally. That's the image of all this. Jesus entering on a donkey was a political statement, or so they understood it. Patriotism sells. We all love our country, and the people of Palestine did too. But were they ready for the message Jesus actually had for them? How about this message? Let the greatest among you be his servant. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. How about this for a rousing statement? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Again, they understood triumphant and victorious. They ignored the part that said humble. Zechariah didn't make a mistake when he put those two concepts together in the same sentence. Triumphant and victorious is not the opposite of humble. Triumphant and victorious are the ultimate destination of the kind of humility Jesus modeled. The road may lead through pain, suffering, the cross. Sometimes that's the narrow path of truth, but it finally ends in resurrection and joy. Ultimately, humility requires the greatest strength of all. During the next 5 days, Jesus showed that to the world. But that's not a truth you can reduce to a bumper sticker. It doesn't do well in focus groups, and it doesn't raise money for your political candidate. And that's how cheers and hosannas on the road into Jerusalem quickly became jeers and curses at the court of Pontius Pilate. That's how massive crowd support dissolved in 1 week's time, so that when Jesus died, no one but a handful of women and one disciple stood before him. Crowd-pleasing messages aren't difficult to offer at all, but truth-telling is a whole other matter. It's thought-provoking to follow the theme of humility through all the teachings of Jesus. That theme is never absent from his words. It's at the root of everything. It's the best way, the only way, to enter into Easter week. To come into it as Jesus did, not on a high horse, but on a donkey. Eyes fixed not on the crowds, but on the cross. Determined to experience the true presence and love and grace of God. The gate for that always lies open to us. Just be sure and check your ego at the door and enter through the liberating virtue of humility. Thanks for listening.